Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full Rick and Morty Season 9, Episode 10 finale video. There are a whole bunch of Easter eggs, references, and callbacks to previous episodes of the show, so we will break it all down. Also, many thanks to YouTube and Google for helping me get my channel back from hackers earlier this week. Had a bit of a scare. The episode title was Field of Dreams, a reference to the Kevin Costner movie, Field of Dreams. It's a solid movie. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend checking it out. It's one of the very few episodes of the series also that doesn't involve a pun in the title of the names of Rick and Morty. In the episode, Morty ends up traveling to different universes, different dimensions, where he finds variants of him who have died and his family's there, trying to move on after the deaths of their Mortys, leading him to have an existential crisis to try and gain more connections, find better versions of his family, which he is not able to do. The episode also highlights how Morty has slowly been corrupted by Rick's influence all these seasons, and the show hasn't been subtle about how abusive Rick is to Morty or the rest of the family is to Morty, but the finale brings it full circle when Morty corrupts a healthy, redeemed Rick in order to get what he wants, showing that Morty is just as bad now as Rick, just as complicit in their toxic relationship. But it's their abusive relationship that has been the beating heart of the show this whole time, but they've tried to have Morty grow as a person without allowing him to age like he's been at 14 years old these past 10 years of the show, Bart Simpson style. The way that Dan Harmon talks about it, he says that Morty is meant to be an idealist. He believes in the truth. He believes that there is a right way to do things. At the core, Rick has grown too across these past 10 seasons, but Rick doesn't really want to believe that or admit that. Their growth occurs while keeping the characters as real as possible. So like they try to keep them at their core and allow them to grow emotionally a little bit season to season, but for the most part, they still keep them in this toxic relationship. The cold open starts in another dimension with another Rick and Morty who are dying because they ate chili that was too spicy, revealing that it killed the rest of the entire family too. That's some extra spice. Jerry is literally burnt to a crisp and still flaming. Using this to introduce the new concept on the show of the Rick and Morty multiverse estate sales. But the way they explain it, this has been going on for a long time. This is just our first time actually seeing it happen on the show. And they basically work like normal estate sales, like you just go and pick through people's things. If you've never been to an estate sale, sometimes you can actually find like really cool stuff that someone's accumulated across their lifetime. Usually under most circumstances, estate sales happen with relatively older people. And if it wasn't clear, the estate sales require that the whole family die. It doesn't work if just one of the members of the family dies. So this is why Morty only sees a couple estate sales in the episode. Like when he goes to a couple of the other funerals in other dimensions, it's just regular funerals. There's no estate sale at those funerals. It takes to the end of the episode again when the entire family is killed because of what Morty has done. He's responsible for all their deaths for another estate sale to be triggered. There's Ninja Ricks and Mortys, a Morty that's head was attached to a robot, One-Eye Monster versions, CRT, TV Ricks and Mortys. Those are one of my favorite versions. Black Ricks and Mortys, a Rick that looks like the green three-eyed aliens from the Toy Story movies, Fish Rick and Morty, Lucha Libre Rick and Morty. C137 brings his Morty and they start checking out the estate sale. It sounds like this is the first estate sale that this Morty has been to. Rick checks out the chili like he thinks about trying it for just a hot second, but because most of his body has been replaced with mechanical parts, it probably wouldn't kill him as easily as it killed this Rick and Morty. Morty also jokes because of modern technology, he doesn't actually read physical, dirty magazines anymore. He just uses the internet like most people nowadays, which they also pay off later in the episode where he's in the library with the other dude just watching random dirty videos on the library's computer.
Nice. Nice. Nice.
Rick then flips out when he sees a circular vehicle lift, which they wind up using for a bunch of animation technique jokes later in the episode, like jokes that animators themselves would make. On Morty's shelf in his bedroom, there's an R2-D2, so Star Wars is canon to Rick and Morty, but they also canonized in previous episodes, like they had the lightsaber episode. There have been many other Star Wars references in previous episodes. There's even another one in this episode in the Parmesian dimension. CRT Rick and Morty steal the flat screen TV, even though if you do have the chance to have a CRT TV, I'd recommend holding on to it for retro games, just because there's still some things that CRT TVs are able to do better than modern flat screen TVs. Morty then meets Sunglasses for Eyes Morty, like the sunglasses are literally his eyes, who tells him about the concept of funeral hopping as a way to have fun and see what his life might be like with other families than the current versions he's been living with. We see that he's got his own portal gun called a Portal Gun Jr. that presumably another Rick made for him, or he stole from another family at some point and got an estate sale, the way that he helps our Morty get his portal gun. You also note later in the episode when the other Jerry breaks the portal gun, this is also probably because the writers don't want him to still have a portal gun at the end of the episode. Like, canonically, they want to take it back to regular, like reset the relationship so that Morty isn't just portaling all over the multiverse by himself at will. There are a couple story-based rules that Dan Harmon and the writers for the show have. Not a lot of rules that they don't violate all the time, but a couple hard and fast rules that, like, whatever they mess with in an episode, a lot of stuff gets reset back to base by the end of the episode, with a few exceptions. Really, you could say that this finale episode isn't like a traditional canonical episode where like they push the canon forward because they reset things at the end of the episode. It's just the Mr. Poopy Butthole post-credit scene that is like the canonical part of the episode, moving the story forward from last season's Mr. Poopy Butthole post-credit scene, as they have done season to season. Like, usually those are canonical, just pushing his story forward with like the crazy wacky stuff he gets up to. While Morty's in the middle of getting his portal gun, we also see a fully robot Rick and Morty rooting through the fridge, which is funny because they're mechanical and wouldn't need food or drink for sustenance. Maybe they're just really interested in it, like this is fascinating for them to collect organic food and water. This episode is also unique in that there is no intro sequence of scenes, they just go straight to title. Then back in the Parmesan dimension at home with Rick enjoying his new rotating motorcycle stands, buying the motorcycle so that he can use the stand, which Morty also jokes about. Like, did you just buy that motorcycle so that you could use the stand? And the reason why the jokes about the stand rotating are such a big deal from an animator's perspective is because the animators in the episode did such a good job of animating Rick's 360 rotation without having to succumb to 3D animation, like it's all still 2D animation. So when Rick is bragging about the cool rotational effects, and later in the episode when it rotates even better because of the hovering, it's the animators bragging about how good they animated this effect. Rick then calls out Morty's funeral hopping, foreshadowing what his whole arc is going to be in this episode, literally calling it out exactly what Morty goes through before he does it. Morty going around to different dimensions, getting fake emotional handjobs from other seeming more caring versions of the family, but ultimately learning that none of them are better than his current toxic version of the family, very dysfunctional version of the family. So it's actually a bit of a downer ending that he realizes that this is the best he's ever going to do with his current Parmesan dimension version of the family. Like, as dysfunctional as it is, it's still his family and he still cares about them. But as dysfunctional as they are, they're better still than the psychopaths in the seeming good dimension that he tried to escape. So again, it's just the idea that he feels like he's never going to find a family that's actually better than his current family in the Parmesan dimension. They both joke that their original families are dead, which they've covered in the events multiple times in previous seasons. The phrase, "do whatever you want, it's your funeral," is a very common saying in real life, but also applies to the literal plot of the episode with his funeral hopping.
Come on, man. I'm asking for guidance.
Do whatever you want. It's your funeral.
First, he visits the big legs dimension where everybody has tiny upper bodies and super long legs. They explain their Rick got drunk and microwaved this Morty to death, which is a common theme with like Rick ultimately causing the death of his Morty in each universe, which our version of Morty also tells the psychopaths in the moral dimension all about too, about how he just hops bodies when he dies. Rick just resurrects him in another body. So it is very common in every dimension that Morty dies in some way. It's just that in some of those dimensions, that Rick is also able to bring him back in some different way. Morty's about to call it a day and go back to the Parmesan dimension until he sees this Jessica kiss her Morty, which hooks him on the whole emotional handjobs of it all, proving that Rick was right when he called him out for it, like this is all you're going to be doing this entire episode. Then tries to go to a bunch of other dimensions to see if he can find things that are better in those universes in those versions of his life. There's a toast dimension where he got burnt to death. This Rick is also drunk, very common theme early in the episode. The Ricks are always being hardcore alcoholics. Toast Morty also pops out of the ground like a toaster. When he visits the next dimension, this Rick is in the middle of cloning his Morty, and the whole family is living in a virtual reality that this Rick created inside the garage. Like, they just live here all the time like this. You also notice the shelves of the garage are different, and it's just a bunch of programs for the virtual reality program, like different scenarios programmed with major life events. There's a goth dimension where the crows eat Morty's body. There's a Frankenstein dimension where the family cuts up their Franken-Morty and gives the pieces to other Frankenstein monsters. Like, that's the estate sale in this universe, is giving his body to other people. A human balloon dimension where everything looks super amazing, but their custom is to blow everyone up like balloons, causing their corpses to just rot in the sky forever. He then travels to the moral dimension where he was called Mort. He was super popular, an athlete, super smart. He just generally had a much better seeming life until eventually he learns the truth that that version of the family were psychopaths. But they explained that this family has never seen another Morty before because their Rick left the family to get sober 17 years ago, so they never really had any wacky multiverse adventures, so he has to explain everything about the show to them, making a couple references about the show without directly breaking the fourth wall. I think this is a big thing too, like one of the rules that the show has, that only Rick is allowed to break the fourth wall like that. I don't think we've ever actually heard Morty directly break the fourth wall on his own. Usually he's with Rick when Rick is breaking the fourth wall, so Morty might know that he is a character in a fictional TV show, but I don't think he himself is ever able to directly acknowledge that, just per the writer's rules. So really of the way that he says that it's a lot of canon to explain to this Jerry, like canon as in rules of the show, like previous events of the show. They then watch what sounds like a Ryan Reynolds parody movie. They never actually call the title of the movie out, but he goes back to the Parmesan dimension to see his family being super dysfunctional like normal. Rick almost kills him then with his new upgraded magnetic bike stand because most of his body parts have been replaced with mechanical parts. And when he goes back to sleep in his own bed, you see next to him there's a Star Wars pun poster, Darth Buddha, right next to him. So more Star Wars references. And he goes back to the moral dimension because he feels like they love him more before he learns the actual truth of what's really going on. It makes the joke about Snowball enslaving him also in a previous episode this season, whereas this dog just seems like a normal dog that loves him. He then tells them about the concept of him dying multiple times on adventures with Rick, and Rick bringing him back by transferring his consciousness into other bodies, which he's also done to himself. Rick has done multiple times. They used it for a real big bit in a previous season, where his mind will just transfer to the nearest available body, even if it's across dimensions. But it hasn't happened in the moral dimension yet because this Rick got sober before he created portal fluid, so he never went on any of those wacky adventures.
Of course there's infinite Mortys, because there's infinite worlds, Morty, and infinite me's!
During the episode, Parmesan Jerry puts on a hat that looks like the one Don Draper wore on Mad Men and sings the Mad Men theme song. So Mad Men is canon to the show. He probably just loves it because he's also in advertising, and they also had some Mad Men jokes and references in the previous episode where he actually gets the job at his new ad agency. We then learn the moral dimension Jerry turned the garage into his workroom because Rick doesn't live there anymore, and on the wall you notice there's a picture of him being super ripped with his dad, who he has a great relationship with and doesn't do super freaky sex stuff like season 1 Jerry's dad did. But when you rewatch the episode knowing that he's a psychopath this whole time and just hiding it really well, it makes you look at the picture a little bit different, like you kind of wonder what twisted stuff was happening in the actual reality of when that picture was taken. Maybe his father was also a super big psychopath just like this Jerry. He takes him to their family's cabin. They have what seemed like a perfect father-son night until this Jerry breaks his portal gun and reveals himself as a full-on psychopath, with Morty trying to escape, then discovering that the Mort from this universe, his version of Morty, also was trying to run away from home and probably died. Like, the truth is, he probably died because he was trying to run away from his Jerry, and his Jerry inadvertently wound up killing him. He then uses Mort's things to discover where this dimension's Rick went and find him to get his help. There's a guy randomly watching dirty websites in the local library, like I said, which he appreciates because he's still a horny teenager, like, nice dude. And finds that this moral dimension Rick has gotten sober 17 years ago and has become a professor at MIT and gotten remarried to another woman who is also a professor at MIT. Making it seem like his life, Rick's life on this universe, is actually so much better that he's gotten sober, which is why it's meant to be more heartbreaking that Morty winds up having to corrupt him and turn him back into another toxic, dysfunctional version of Rick in order to get what he wants. Also proving that Morty is no better than Rick, even though he does a lot of moral grandstanding episode to episode against Rick. At Rick's lecture, he references the concept that his math and research have proven that nothing really matters in the multiverse, which is something that C137 Rick says all the time. He calls this dimension the moral universe, and then this Rick references the central finite curve, portal travel, and reveals that he was about to create that, but stopped when he got sober. Morty also clues him into the idea later that in a lot of universes, some Ricks just wind up stealing the portal technology from other universes instead of trying to create it themselves. So like, not every Rick is as smart as every other Rick. And some are definitely more evil than others. He then makes an Amadeus reference, takes Morty to his AA meeting, there's a Community sign behind them, one of Dan Harmon's other biggest shows. Most of the main cast of Community have now guest starred on Rick and Morty, some of them multiple times, but there are still a couple actors from Community that have not appeared yet. Most of the time, the reason for that is just availability, like when they want them, they don't have them, or the role that they want them for isn't ready at the time, like it's just not the right timing. They also confirmed that they're in the middle of making that Community movie, like that's still happening. Morty then meets Rick's new wife, and the reason why Morty has Rick's eyes is because he's his biological grandson, so the gene for the big bug eyes just got passed down. And because she is also a highly intelligent professor at MIT, she just clocks everything immediately. Like she instantly understands what's happening in the episode, these really advanced concepts that Morty throws at her. Jerry and the rest of the psychopath family all come to abduct Morty. As they montage the portal construction, they watch the Amadeus movie like Rick told them they would earlier, but slowly you see Rick starts to neglect his wife more and more as he begins to get corrupted slowly, like he said that he would, like he kind of called it out, like, I stopped doing this because if I continued doing it, it would wind up destroying my life. Which eventually he was correct, it winds up destroying, literally killing the entire family in this universe. This Rick also reveals that he believes in God, he's not an atheist like most Ricks, and Morty tells him that his Diane dies in every universe, which also kind of destroys him, getting back to the idea in his lecture where he said nothing matters across the multiverse. And probably one of the coldest things that Morty does in this episode, he does a lot of really twisted stuff in addition to corrupting this Rick, but it's telling his new wife that Rick belongs more to him than to her. That just felt hardcore. The psychopath family then chokes out the dean at MIT, and Summer hacks into their system and puts herself on the admissions list. This Rick then wakes Morty up in the middle of the night while drunk, just like C137 Rick has done so many times across the seasons. Many, many times. He does it at the end of the episode again, too. He then turns the nice Russian janitor, who it seemed like he was really good friends with, into a messed up dog, setting up the bit at the end of the episode where he turns Sunglasses Morty into a dog, and the other Rick turns himself into another dog. He eventually creates another portal that's able to stick for a little while, but it's jankier than C137 Rick's portal, it's less stable, and it turns the cat inside out, ultimately destabilizes, blowing up almost the entire family, except for Psychopath Beth, who kills herself. Morty is forced to watch, and he's forced to watch the cat, who is still alive, slowly die very, very painfully. And I would say it winds up being one of the most traumatic things that Morty has experienced, but he experiences stuff at this level of trauma almost every single season. Like you could spend days arguing with someone what the most traumatic thing Morty has experienced since the start of the show. But eventually he's rescued when instantly after the last member of this dimension's family dies, it triggers another multiverse estate sale and all the other Ricks and Mortys portal in, including C137 Rick, who, interestingly enough, doesn't really care that Morty has done all these terrible things. He just accepts it like, oh, okay, come on, let's go home. So Morty is able to get home, and all it took was destroying a whole entire other version of the family, proving that he's every bit as toxic as Rick. We then get scenes with him trying to reconnect with the rest of the family and failing, then realizes that this bad version of the family, or he thinks is unloving, uncaring, is the best he's ever going to do in accepting it. So it kind of winds up being a downer ending until Rick wakes him up in the middle of the night again for another adventure, just like he normally does on the show many, many times, mentions the hero's journey, which is another huge Dan Harmon deep cut Easter egg. In real life, Dan Harmon has made a huge deal about using the Joseph Campbell hero's journey model for the way that he writes all of his episodes of television on all of his shows. You can see him using it in the writer's room on the board in the Rick and Morty bonus features in the earlier seasons. It's such a big joke in Hollywood that the Simpsons writers also parodied this when he got fired from Community and then rehired. And when Rick proclaims that he is Morty's dad, that's just him being drunk, like metaphorically he's more of a father to Morty than Jerry in this universe is. Biologically, though, he's still Morty's grandfather, and even technically, if you want to get technical, they're all from different universes anyway. So at the end of the episode, Morty sort of comes to the realization that this is his best version of the family, and he belongs here. Like, he understands that it's very toxic, but he accepts it. Then in the post-credit scene this time, as per tradition in the finale episodes, is another Mr. Poopy Butthole scene where they follow last season's bit of our Mr. Poopy Butthole trying to steal the life of another variant from the multiverse and step into his life with his wife, explaining that this version of his wife figured out what he was doing trying to steal the life of one of his variants and is now trying to use him to find her real husband out in the multiverse. So maybe in the next season 10 post-credit scene, they'll find this other Mr. Poopy Butthole that he tried to replace during season 9. But just to be clear, this Mr. Poopy Butthole who says that Amy got wise to what he's trying to do is the regular Mr. Poopy Butthole that we've been following on the show this whole time.
Activate fourth dimensional thrusters!
The scene is also meant to flow with the theme of this week's episode where Morty is hopping around dimensions looking for better versions of his family. This Mr. Poopy Butthole did that and jumped into this life, tried to steal this life. Recently, the writers said that Season 10 is on track to release next year around the same time, and the show, I believe, has been renewed through at least Season 12, and they're also working on the Rick and Morty movie, but they haven't said exactly when that's going to happen, only that they have a story that they like. It's probably going to take a couple years for them to actually release that, but they didn't say if it's going to be a theatrical release or if they're just going to release it on HBO Max, so we will see how they handle that, because there was a huge debacle with Avatar: The Last Airbender movie, the Aang movie, that they were going to put in theaters, but then tried to put on Paramount Plus, and then gave a small theatrical release to, so it was a real back and forth if you've been following the Avatar movie, especially with the big leak that had. Been a real hard year for Avatar: The Last Airbender fans. Everybody post all your reactions in the comments below, and your reactions to Season 9 just in general compared to other recent seasons, because it does seem like Season 9 was much better than last season. It's kind of been like this on The Simpsons since it's gone on for so long. There have been stretches of The Simpsons where it got really terrible, but then later seasons, like much later seasons, where it did start to get a little bit better, but then got terrible again, and it just goes through these booms and bust cycles, so maybe that will continue to happen with Rick and Morty if it does go on for 100 years. There's still a bunch of stuff from Comic-Con that I'm trying to make videos for. We're also in the middle of Spider-Man Brand New Day hitting theaters, so I have a bunch of big Spider-Man videos that I'm going to be posting in the next couple of days. Be sure to go see that movie as soon as possible so you don't miss any of that stuff. Everybody click here for my Spider-Man Brand New Day review, and click here for all my other big Comic-Con videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.